Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the military base, her heart pounding as she watched the black sedan disappear into the desert dust. The weight of the access card in her pocket felt heavier than the entire world pressing down on her shoulders. She had never imagined that 20 years of dedicated service would end with General Morrison screaming at her to leave the base immediately, his face red with anger and something else she couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps. The morning had started like any other at the Blackwater Military Research Facility in Nevada. Sarah had arrived at her laboratory at exactly 6 in the morning, just as she had done every day for the past 5 years, since being transferred to this classified location. As the head of the Advanced Weapons Systems Division, she held one of the highest security clearances in the entire military complex. Her work on the new automated defense system had been progressing smoothly, and today was supposed to be the final calibration test. The automated defense system, codenamed Project Guardian, represented the pinnacle of military technology. It was designed to protect critical infrastructure from any threat, capable of identifying and neutralizing enemies within a radius of 50 miles. The system could launch everything from small tactical missiles to large-scale bombardments, all controlled by advanced artificial intelligence that Sarah had spent 3 years perfecting. What made the system truly revolutionary was its fail-safe mechanism. Only 3 people in the entire world possessed the access codes needed to activate or deactivate Guardian once it was online. General Morrison held the primary code, Colonel Rodriguez from the Pentagon had the secondary authorization, and Sarah held the emergency override code that could either activate the system in case of dire emergency or shut it down completely if something went wrong. Sarah walked into her laboratory that morning, greeting her team of 12 technicians and engineers who had been working alongside her on the project. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. After months of testing individual components, today they would finally run the complete system integration test. If everything went according to plan, Project Guardian would be declared operational within the week. "Good morning, Dr. Chen," called out Marcus, her lead technician. "All systems are green across the board. We're ready for the integration test whenever you give the word." Sarah nodded, settling into her workstation and pulling up the complex array of monitors that displayed every aspect of the Guardian system. Lines of code scrolled across multiple screens, sensor readings flickered with green lights, and the massive central display showed a 3-dimensional map of the entire base and surrounding area. For the next 4 hours, everything proceeded exactly as planned. The artificial intelligence responded perfectly to test scenarios, the weapon systems calibrated within acceptable parameters, and the communication networks maintained stable connections throughout the facility. Sarah felt a sense of pride watching her creation come to life. This system could protect thousands of soldiers and civilians from future threats. It was just after 10 in the morning when Colonel Reeves from Intelligence burst into her laboratory without warning. His usually composed demeanor was replaced by obvious panic, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Dr. Chen, we have a problem," he announced, his voice tight with stress. "I need you to stop the test immediately and shut down all Guardian systems." Sarah looked up from her workstation, surprised by the interruption. "Colonel, we're in the middle of a critical calibration sequence. Stopping now could corrupt months of programming and set us back significantly. What's the emergency?" Colonel Reeves glanced around the laboratory at her team, then stepped closer to Sarah's desk. "I can't discuss the details here, but I've received intelligence that suggests there might be a security breach related to the project. General Morrison is reviewing the situation, but until we know more, all Guardian operations need to cease." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She had built multiple security layers into the Guardian system specifically to prevent any kind of breach or unauthorized access. The idea that someone might have compromised her work felt like a personal violation. "Are you suggesting someone has accessed the Guardian code?" she asked quietly. "I'm not suggesting anything yet," Reeves replied. "But the general wants to see you in his office immediately. Please initiate shutdown procedures and have your team secure all materials." Sarah's mind raced as she began the shutdown sequence. The Guardian system was designed to be extremely difficult to stop once fully activated, requiring specific protocols and her personal access codes. As she worked through the complex procedure, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The shutdown took nearly 30 minutes to complete safely. Sarah made sure that all weapon systems were disarmed, all AI functions were suspended, and all network connections were severed before finally powering down the central processing units. Her team watched in confused silence as months of preparation came to an abrupt halt. "Everyone take an early lunch," Sarah announced to her team. "I'll let you know when we can resume operations." The walk to General Morrison's office felt longer than usual. Sarah had worked with Morrison for over 3 years. And while he could be demanding and strict, she had never seen him lose his temper or act irrationally. He had always supported her work on Guardian and had frequently praised her dedication to the project. Morrison's secretary waved her through without the usual pleasantries, and Sarah knocked on the general's door before entering. What she found inside shocked her. Morrison sat behind his massive oak desk, but he wasn't alone. 3 men in dark suits stood around the room, none of whom she recognized. Their presence immediately put her on edge. "Dr. Chen," Morrison said without looking up from a file spread across his desk, "please have a seat." Sarah sat in one of the leather chairs facing Morrison's desk, acutely aware that the 3 strangers were studying her intently. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Morrison finally looked up, his expression harder than she had ever seen it. "Sarah, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them honestly and completely," Morrison began. "How many people have access to your Guardian project codes?" "You know the answer to that, General," Sarah replied, confused by the question. "Only 3 people have access codes. You, Colonel Rodriguez, and myself. That was established from the beginning for security purposes." One of the men in suits stepped forward and placed a manila folder on Morrison's desk. Morrison opened it and pulled out several photographs, which he turned toward Sarah. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked at the images. The photographs showed her meeting with a man she didn't recognize at a coffee shop downtown. In one image, they appeared to be exchanging something, though Sarah couldn't make out what it was. In another, the man was handing her what looked like an envelope. "Can you explain these photographs, Dr. Chen?" Morrison asked, his voice cold and professional. Sarah stared at the images, her mind reeling. "General, I have no idea what these photos are supposed to show. I don't recognize this man, and I certainly haven't met with anyone about the Guardian project outside of authorized personnel." "These photographs were taken 3 days ago at Romano's Coffee House on 5th Street, one of the suited men said. "Our surveillance shows you had a 40-minute conversation with Viktor Petrov, a known associate of Foreign Intelligence Services." "That's impossible," Sarah protested, her voice rising slightly. "I was at the base 3 days ago working late on the final code revisions. I have security logs that will prove it." Morrison held up a hand to silence her. "Sarah, we've already checked the logs. They show you left the base at 3:47 p.m. and didn't return until 6:23 p.m. That's plenty of time for this meeting to have occurred." Sarah's world felt like it was spinning out of control. She remembered working late 3 days ago, but she had taken a break to run some personal errands in town. She had gone to the bank, stopped at the pharmacy for her mother's medication, and grabbed a quick coffee before returning to base. But she couldn't remember every person she might have encountered or sat near during that coffee break. "General, even if I did unknowingly sit near this person at a coffee shop, that doesn't mean I shared any classified information with him," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My commitment to this project and to national security is absolute." "Then explain this," Morrison said, sliding another document across the desk. It was a bank statement showing a deposit of $50,000 into her account from an offshore source, dated 2 days after the alleged coffee shop meeting. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up the bank statement. The account number was definitely hers, but she had never seen this deposit before. "General, I have no knowledge of this deposit. Someone must have accessed my account illegally." "Dr. Chen," the lead-suited man said, "we have reason to believe that you have been compromised by foreign agents who are seeking to gain access to the Guardian system. The deposit could be payment for information you've already provided, or it could be advance payment for access codes you plan to provide." "This is insane," Sarah said, standing up from her chair. "I would never betray my country or compromise this project. Someone is clearly trying to frame me." Morrison looked genuinely pained as he spoke his next words. "Sarah, regardless of your intentions, your security clearance is suspended effective immediately. You're being removed from the Guardian project, and you need to surrender all access materials." Sarah felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "General, you can't be serious. This project is my life's work. Without my involvement, you won't be able to complete the final integration safely." "We'll manage," Morrison replied curtly. "Please surrender your access card and any other materials related to the project." With shaking hands, Sarah removed the access card from her pocket and placed it on Morrison's desk. The small plastic rectangle contained not just her authorization codes, but also critical system information that would be needed if Guardian ever required emergency activation or shutdown. "I want a full investigation into these allegations," Sarah demanded. "When you discover that I've been framed, I expect to be reinstated immediately." Morrison nodded slightly. "An investigation will be conducted. Until then, you're restricted from entering any secure areas of the base, and you'll be escorted to collect your personal belongings before leaving the facility." The next hour passed in a blur of humiliation and confusion. Under the watchful eyes of 2 security guards, Sarah packed her personal items from her laboratory while her team looked on in shocked silence. None of them understood what was happening, and Sarah couldn't explain it to them even if she wanted to. As she carried her box of belongings toward the main gate, Sarah's mind raced through everything that had led to this moment. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate frame job to remove her from the Guardian project, but who would go to such lengths, and why? The security guard at the main gate handed her a temporary identification card and explained that she would need to report to the base commander's office every day at 8 in the morning until the investigation was complete. She was not to leave the local area without permission. Sarah climbed into her car and sat in the parking lot for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. 20 years of spotless military service had been destroyed in less than 2 hours based on photographs and financial records that she couldn't explain. As she drove away from the base toward her small apartment in town, Sarah didn't notice the black sedan that had been following her since she left Morrison's office. The men inside had been tracking her movements for weeks, waiting for exactly this moment when she would be isolated and desperate. The plan had worked perfectly so far, but the most critical phase was yet to come. With Sarah removed from the base but still in possession of knowledge that could be extracted from her, the next 24 hours would determine whether their mission succeeded or failed catastrophically. Sarah arrived at her apartment as the sun was setting, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. She sat on her small balcony, looking back toward the military base in the distance, and tried to figure out her next move. She needed to prove her innocence, but she had no idea where to start. What she didn't know was that General Morrison had made a terrible mistake in his haste to remove her from the base. In his anger and fear, he had forgotten to change the Guardian system's emergency protocols. Sarah's access codes were still active in the system's memory, and her removal from the project had triggered an automatic security response that would activate Guardian's defensive measures in exactly 18 hours. The timer was already counting down, and unless someone realized the error and corrected it, The most powerful automated weapon system ever created would come online with no way to control it, except through the access codes that Sarah still carried in her memory. The desert wind picked up as darkness fell, carrying with it the first hints of the storm that was about to engulf everyone involved in Project Guardian. Sarah woke up at 3 in the morning to the sound of her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. Still groggy from the few hours of restless sleep she had managed, she reached for the device and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Her first instinct was to ignore it, but something made her answer. "Dr. Chen," a voice she didn't recognize said urgently, "you need to listen to me very carefully. Your life is in immediate danger." Sarah sat up in bed, instantly alert. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" "My name is Agent David Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. I've been investigating irregularities in the Guardian project for the past 6 months, and I believe you've been set up to take the fall for something much bigger than you realize." "How do I know you're really DIA?" Sarah asked, moving to her window and carefully looking out at the parking lot below. She could see the same black sedan that had been parked there when she arrived home. "Check your email," Walsh said. "I'm sending you my credentials and some information that will prove I'm legitimate. But Dr. Chen, we don't have much time. The people who framed you are planning to eliminate you tonight." Sarah's laptop was already open on her kitchen table from her attempts to research the bank deposit. She opened her email and found a message from an official DIA address containing Agent Walsh's identification and a brief summary of his investigation into Project Guardian. "I see your credentials," Sarah said, "but I still don't understand what this is about. Why would anyone want to frame me?" "Because someone has been planning to steal the Guardian system from the beginning," Walsh explained. "They needed to remove you from the project to gain access, but they also needed to keep you alive long enough to extract your access codes. The frame job was designed to isolate you from military protection while making you desperate enough to consider illegal options." Sarah felt her blood turn cold. "Are you saying the coffee shop meeting was staged?" "Everything was staged, Dr. Chen. Viktor Petrov is a real intelligence operative, but he wasn't there to recruit you. He was there to be photographed with you. The $50,000 deposit came from an account controlled by the same people who orchestrated this entire operation." Sarah paced her small apartment, trying to process this information. But who would have the resources to plan something this elaborate? And how would they even know about Guardian in the first place? "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Walsh said. "The leak had to come from someone with high-level clearance, someone who knew not just about the existence of Guardian, but about the specific security protocols and access code structure." Suddenly, Sarah heard a car door slam outside. She moved to the window again and saw 2 men in dark clothing approaching her building. "Agent Walsh, I think they're here. 2 men are coming toward my apartment." "Get out now," Walsh commanded. "Go out the back exit and head toward the old mining road behind your complex. I have a team positioned there, but you need to move immediately." Sarah grabbed her laptop, her phone, and the few important documents she had brought home from the base. She didn't bother with clothes or personal items as she slipped out the back door of her apartment and into the cool desert night. The old mining road was about 200 yards behind her apartment complex, accessed through a gap in a chain-link fence that the local kids used as a shortcut. Sarah had jogged this route many times and knew the path well, even in the darkness. As she reached the fence, she could hear footsteps behind her and the sound of her apartment door being forced open. Someone was definitely pursuing her. She squeezed through the gap in the fence and ran toward the mining road, her heart pounding and her breath coming in short gasps. A dark SUV materialized from behind a cluster of Joshua trees, and Agent Walsh got out of the passenger side. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with short brown hair and the lean build of someone who spent a lot of time in the field. "Dr. Chen, I'm Agent Walsh. We need to get you out of here immediately," he said, helping her into the back seat of the SUV. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked as the vehicle began moving quickly along the rough mining road. "Safe house about 30 miles from here," Walsh replied. "We have some questions for you, and I need to show you what we've discovered about the Guardian project." The safe house turned out to be an old ranch house tucked into a canyon that was invisible from the main road. Agent Walsh led Sarah inside, where two other agents were monitoring multiple computer screens and communications equipment. "Dr. Chen," Walsh said, "I need you to look at this and tell me if you recognize anything." He handed her a tablet displaying what appeared to be Guardian system code, but it had been modified in ways that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. "This is Guardian code," she said slowly, "but someone has altered the targeting parameters and removed most of the safety protocols. If this version were activated, it wouldn't just defend against threats. It would attack any target that moved within its sensor range." "That's what we were afraid of," one of the other agents said. "We intercepted this modified code from a server farm in Eastern Europe. Someone has been preparing to turn Guardian into an offensive weapon rather than a defensive system." Sarah studied the code more carefully, her expertise allowing her to see the full scope of the modifications. "This is horrifying. With these changes, Guardian would fire on civilian aircraft, ground vehicles, even people walking near the base. It would be a massacre." "Dr. Chen," Walsh said gravely, "we believe that the people who framed you are planning to activate Guardian with this modified code. They needed you removed from the project so they could replace the original programming without your knowledge." "But that's impossible," Sarah protested. "Guardian requires authorization codes from 3 separate people to activate. General Morrison and Colonel Rodriguez would never agree to activate a system with this kind of modification." Walsh exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Dr. Chen, we have reason to believe that either General Morrison or Colonel Rodriguez is involved in this conspiracy. Someone with top-level access has been feeding information to the people behind this operation." Sarah felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The idea that either Morrison or Rodriguez could be involved in stealing her life's work and turning it into a weapon of mass destruction was almost too much to comprehend. "There's something else," Walsh continued. "Our technical analysis shows that the Guardian system is scheduled to activate automatically in about 14 hours. Someone has programmed a delayed activation sequence that will bring the system online whether authorization codes are entered or not." "That's not possible," Sarah said immediately. "I built multiple safeguards into Guardian specifically to prevent automated activation. The system cannot start without human authorization. Unless someone with your level of access modified the core programming," Walsh pointed out. "Dr. Chen, we believe that when you were removed from the project today, it triggered some kind of failsafe that you might not have been aware of." Sarah's mind raced back through months of programming and testing. She had built Guardian to be absolutely secure, but she had also built in emergency protocols that would activate the system if the base came under attack and normal command structures were compromised. "Oh no," she whispered as the realization hit her. "There is an emergency activation protocol. If the base's command structure is compromised or if key personnel are removed under hostile conditions, Guardian is programmed to activate automatically after 18 hours. "How long ago were you removed from the project?" Walsh asked urgently. Sarah checked her watch. "About 4 hours ago. That means Guardian will activate in 14 hours, with or without proper authorization codes. And if it activates with the modified programming we discovered? It will treat everything in a 50-mile radius as a potential threat," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Military personnel, civilians, aircraft, vehicles. Guardian will fire on anything that moves." One of the other agents looked up from his computer screen. "Agent Walsh, we're getting reports that General Morrison has called an emergency meeting for all senior staff at 0600 hours. That's about an hour after Guardian is scheduled to activate." Walsh cursed under his breath. They're planning to have all the key personnel in one place when Guardian comes online. If the system has been programmed to target the base itself, it could eliminate the entire command structure in one attack. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing the small room as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This isn't just about stealing Guardian technology. Someone is planning to use my system to destroy the entire base and everyone on it. Dr. Chen, Walsh said, is there any way to stop the activation sequence once it's started? Sarah thought carefully about the security protocols she had designed. There are only two ways to stop it. Either all three authorization code holders have to input their codes simultaneously to abort the sequence, or someone with emergency override authority has to physically access the main control terminal and shut down the system manually. Who has emergency override authority? I do, Sarah said quietly. But I would need to be at the base and I would need my access card, which General Morrison confiscated. What about the codes themselves? Walsh asked. Are they stored somewhere other than the access cards? Sarah hesitated. This was classified information of the highest level, but given the circumstances, she felt she had no choice. The codes are also stored biometrically. Guardian recognizes retinal scans, fingerprints, and voice patterns of authorized users. But that system can only be accessed from the main control terminal. One of the agents monitoring communications suddenly spoke up. Agent Walsh, we're intercepting radio chatter from the base. It sounds like they're beginning some kind of evacuation procedure for non-essential personnel. They're clearing the base of witnesses, Walsh realized. Whoever is behind this wants to minimize the number of people who could potentially interfere with their plans. Sarah felt a growing sense of urgency. Her system was about to be used for mass murder, and she might be the only person who could stop it. Agent Walsh, I need to get back to that base. Guardian cannot be allowed to activate with the modified programming. Dr. Chen, getting you onto that base will be nearly impossible. Security will have been increased dramatically. And you're persona non grata as of this afternoon. Then we need to find another way, Sarah said firmly. What about Colonel Rodriguez? If he's not part of the conspiracy, maybe we can contact him and warn him about what's happening. Walsh pulled out a secure phone and began making calls. After several attempts, he was able to reach Colonel Rodriguez at the Pentagon. Sarah listened to one side of the conversation, her hopes rising and falling as Walsh explained the situation. Colonel Rodriguez confirms that he hasn't been contacted about any Guardian activation, Walsh reported after ending the call. He's trying to reach General Morrison now, but Morrison isn't responding to calls or messages. That settles it, Sarah said. Morrison has to be involved. He's the only one who could have modified the activation sequence without my knowledge. Dr. Chen, one of the monitoring agents, called out. We're getting reports of unusual activity at several other military installations across the country. It looks like Guardian isn't the only system that might be compromised. Walsh looked at the reports coming in on multiple screens. This is bigger than we thought. They're not just targeting one base. This could be a coordinated attack on multiple military facilities simultaneously. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was unfolding. Her work on Guardian had been intended to protect military installations, not to provide the means for attacking them. Someone had taken her defensive system and turned it into the perfect weapon for destroying America's military infrastructure. Agent Walsh, she said, I don't care how dangerous it is. We have to get to that base and stop Guardian from activating. If this system comes online with hostile programming, hundreds of people will die, and our national defense will be crippled. Walsh looked at his watch. They had less than 13 hours before Guardian activated, and the distance to the base would take at least 2 hours to cover, even driving at high speed. That would leave them with very little time to infiltrate the facility and reach the control terminal. All right, Dr. Chen, Walsh said. We're going to attempt a rescue mission, but I need you to understand that we're probably walking into a trap. Whoever planned this has had months to prepare, and they'll be expecting someone to try to stop them. I understand the risks, Sarah replied. But Guardian is my responsibility. I created it to protect people, and I won't let it be turned into a weapon of mass destruction. As the agents began preparing their equipment for the mission, Sarah stared out the window at the distant lights of the military base. Somewhere in that facility, her life's work was counting down toward becoming a nightmare that could change the course of American military defense forever. Time was running out, and the next few hours would determine whether Project Guardian would fulfill its original purpose or become the deadliest mistake of Sarah's career. The desert air was cold and still as Agent Walsh's team approached the perimeter of Blackwater Military Research Facility at 4:30 in the morning. Sarah crouched behind a rocky outcropping, watching the base through night vision goggles that made everything appear in an eerie green glow. They had less than 2 hours before Guardian would activate automatically. "Security patrols have been doubled," Walsh whispered through his radio headset. "Count at least 16 guards visible around the main complex, twice the normal number." Sarah studied the familiar layout of the base where she had worked for 5 years. The main laboratory building where Guardian's control systems were housed sat in the center of the complex, surrounded by administrative buildings, storage facilities, and living quarters for essential personnel. "The control terminal is on the 3rd floor of Lab Building C," Sarah explained to Walsh and his 3-man team. "It's in a secured room that requires both keycard access and biometric verification. Even if we get inside the building, reaching the control room will be difficult." "Dr. Chen," one of Walsh's agents said quietly, "we're picking up radio chatter that suggests General Morrison is already in the control room with several other people. It sounds like they're conducting some kind of final preparation." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold desert air. Morrison's presence in the control room at this hour confirmed her worst fears. The general she had trusted and worked with for years was indeed part of the conspiracy to turn Guardian into a weapon. Walsh checked his equipment one final time before giving his team the signal to move. They had practiced the infiltration route during the drive to the base, using satellite images to identify the best approach path. Their plan was to enter through a maintenance tunnel that connected to the old mining operations in the area. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person to crawl through, and Sarah found herself fighting claustrophobia as they made their way through hundreds of yards of cramped space. The air was stale and filled with dust that made it difficult to breathe quietly. After what felt like hours, but was actually only 20 minutes, they emerged inside a storage building on the edge of the base complex. Walsh used a small device to scan for electronic surveillance before signaling that the area was clear. "Guardian activation in 97 minutes, Walsh whispered as they prepared to cross the open ground toward the main laboratory building. Sarah's heart was racing as they moved from shadow to shadow, avoiding the patrol routes that she knew from years of working at the facility. Every few minutes, guards would pass by their hiding spots, and Sarah held her breath, knowing that discovery would mean failure and the deaths of countless innocent people. As they approached Lab Building C, Walsh suddenly held up his hand, signaling the team to stop. Through his earpiece, Sarah could hear radio communications between the guards, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "Base commander to all units," came General Morrison's voice over the radio. "Be advised that we have confirmed intelligence of an attempted infiltration tonight. Shoot to kill any unauthorized personnel found in secure areas." "He knows we're here," Sarah whispered to Walsh. "This whole thing could be a trap." Walsh nodded grimly. "We proceed anyway. Too much is at stake to turn back now." They reached the service entrance to Lab Building C without encountering guards, but Sarah immediately noticed something wrong. The electronic lock system that should have required a key card was showing a green light, indicating the door was already unlocked. "Someone wants us to get inside," Walsh observed. "This is definitely a trap." "Maybe," Sarah replied, but Guardian activates in less than 90 minutes whether we walk into a trap or not. We don't have a choice." They slipped inside the building and made their way toward the stairwell leading to the third floor. The corridors were eerily quiet, with only emergency lighting providing dim illumination. Sarah had never been in the building at night, and the familiar halls felt strange and threatening in the near darkness. As they climbed the stairs to the third floor, Sarah began to hear voices coming from the direction of the control room. She recognized General Morrison's voice, but there were at least 2 other people with him, neither of whom she could identify. Walsh positioned his team members at strategic points along the corridor, while he and Sarah approached the control room. The door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Sarah could see banks of computer monitors displaying Guardian system information. "Guardian activation in 71 minutes and counting," she heard Morrison saying to someone. "All modified programming is loaded and ready. Once the system comes online, we'll have complete control over the most powerful automated weapons platform ever created." "And you're certain Dr. Chen can't stop the activation?" asked an unfamiliar voice with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't place. "Chen was removed from the project and has no way to access this facility," Morrison replied. "Even if she somehow got inside, she would need both her access card and biometric verification to use the emergency override. We have her access card, and we've disabled the biometric systems." Sarah felt a surge of hope. If the biometric systems were disabled, it meant that Morrison didn't know about the secondary emergency protocol she had built into Guardian. In case of catastrophic system failure, Guardian could be shut down using a combination of voice commands and manual code entry that didn't require electronic verification. Walsh was filming everything through the gap in the door, recording Morrison's confession for evidence. But as they watched, Sarah saw something on one of the monitors that made her gasp in horror. The Guardian system status display showed that the modified programming wasn't just designed to attack targets around the base. The system had been reprogrammed to target coordinates across the entire United States. Major cities, military installations, government buildings, and critical infrastructure were all marked as potential targets. "This isn't just an attack on one military base," Sarah whispered to Walsh. "They're planning to use Guardian to launch a nationwide assault." Walsh's expression grew even more grim as he watched the monitors. The scope of the conspiracy was far beyond anything they had imagined. Guardian's satellite communication links and networked connections to other military systems would allow it to coordinate attacks across the entire country. "Guardian activation in 64 minutes, Morrison announced. "Begin final system checks." Sarah knew they were running out of time. In just over an hour, her creation would become active with programming that would turn it into a weapon of mass destruction. She had to reach the control terminal and initiate the emergency shutdown before it was too late. "Agent Walsh," she whispered, "I need to get to that control terminal. Can your team create a distraction?" Walsh nodded and began signaling his team members. Within seconds, they heard the sound of an explosion from somewhere else in the building, followed by alarm sirens and shouting voices. "Security breach in Section D," came a voice over Morrison's radio. "Multiple intruders detected, requesting immediate backup." Morrison cursed and grabbed his radio. "All available personnel respond to Section D immediately. Maintain 2 guards at the control room, but everyone else converge on the breach." Through the doorway, Sarah could see Morrison and 2 other men in civilian clothes leaving the control room, heading toward the disturbance Walsh's team had created. Only 2 guards remained behind, standing near the bank of monitors. Walsh looked at Sarah and nodded. This was their chance. He moved swiftly into the control room, using a tranquilizer gun to incapacitate both guards before they could raise an alarm. Sarah rushed to the main control terminal and began typing rapidly. "Guardian activation in 58 minutes, the computer announced in a calm electronic voice. Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard as she accessed the emergency shutdown protocols. The system prompted her for authorization, and she leaned toward the microphone built into the control panel. "Emergency authorization, Dr. Sarah Chen," she said clearly. "Voice pattern recognition override." "Voice pattern not recognized," the computer replied. "Emergency protocols require secondary verification." Sarah's heart sank. Morrison had been more thorough than she had hoped. He had somehow modified even the emergency systems to prevent her from stopping Guardian's activation. "Agent Walsh," she called urgently, "I need my access card. The voice recognition has been tampered with, but I might be able to manually input my codes if I have the card." Walsh began searching the control room for Sarah's confiscated access card, checking desks and file cabinets while Sarah continued trying different approaches to the emergency shutdown. "Guardian activation in 53 minutes, the computer announced. "Final system initialization beginning." Sarah watched in horror as Guardian's weapons systems began their startup sequence. Missile batteries were coming online, targeting computers were calibrating, and communication links to other military networks were being established. In less than an hour, the most sophisticated killing machine ever created would be fully operational. "Found it," Walsh called out, pulling Sarah's access card from a locked desk drawer. "Will this work?" Sarah took the card and inserted it into the control terminal. Immediately, new options appeared on her screen, including the emergency shutdown command she desperately needed. "Emergency shutdown initiated," she said to the computer while simultaneously entering her personal access codes. "Authorization, Dr. Sarah Chen, Guardian Project Director. Emergency shutdown requires confirmation from secondary authorization holder," the computer responded. "General Morrison or Colonel Rodriguez must verify shutdown command." Sarah realized the trap that had been set for her. Morrison had modified Guardian's programming so that even with her access card and codes, she couldn't shut down the system without his cooperation. He had anticipated that she might try to stop the activation and had ensured that only he could prevent it. "Agent Walsh, we need to find General Morrison," Sarah said desperately. "I can't stop Guardian without his authorization codes." "Guardian activation in 47 minutes, the computer announced. "Weapon systems at 60% operational status." Suddenly, the control room door burst open, and General Morrison entered with 4 armed guards. His face was flushed with anger and what looked like genuine panic. "Dr. Chen," Morrison said, raising his hands to show he wasn't armed. "Thank God you're here. I need your help to stop this nightmare." Sarah stared at Morrison in confusion. "General, what are you talking about?" "We know you're part of the conspiracy to steal Guardian technology." Morrison shook his head vigorously. "Dr. Chen, you have it completely wrong. I've been trying to stop this conspiracy, not lead it. The men you saw me with were holding my family hostage. They forced me to cooperate by threatening to kill my wife and children." "Guardian activation in 44 minutes, the computer announced. "Weapons systems at 75% operational status." Walsh kept his weapon trained on Morrison while Sarah tried to process this new information. "General, if you're really trying to stop this, then help me shut down Guardian before it activates." Morrison approached the control terminal, moving slowly to avoid alarming Walsh. "Dr. Chen, I've been trying to shut it down for hours, but the system has been modified beyond my understanding. The people behind this have programming expertise that exceeds even yours." Sarah looked at the monitors showing Guardian's status and realized that Morrison was telling the truth. The code modifications were far more sophisticated than anything she had seen earlier. Someone with intimate knowledge of Guardian's design had spent months preparing for this moment. "Who are they?" Sarah asked urgently. "Who has the expertise to modify Guardian at this level?" "Dr. Chen," Morrison said grimly, "the lead programmer on this operation is someone you know very well, someone who had access to Guardian's code from the very beginning." Sarah felt a chill of recognition as she realized who Morrison was talking about. "Marcus, my lead technician. But that's impossible. Marcus has been with me for 3 years. He helped build Guardian from the ground up. Marcus Chen, Morrison confirmed. Your cousin, who immigrated from China 10 years ago and has been working as a deep-cover intelligence operative ever since. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus had indeed emigrated from China, but she had sponsored his immigration and helped him get security clearance based on their family relationship. The idea that he had been using her trust to gain access to America's most classified weapons systems was almost too much to bear. Guardian activation in 38 minutes, the computer announced. Weapons systems at 90% operational status. Dr. Chen, Morrison said urgently. Marcus programmed Guardian with a backdoor that only he can access. We need to find him and force him to shut down the system. Walsh lowered his weapon slightly. Where is Marcus now? Morrison pointed to one of the monitors showing security camera feeds from around the base. He's in the main communications center, coordinating with his handlers via satellite link. He's been transmitting Guardian's programming to servers in multiple countries. Sarah realized the full scope of what was happening. Guardian wasn't just being turned into a weapon for use against American targets. Its technology was being stolen and copied, providing hostile nations with the ability to build their own automated weapons systems. Guardian activation in 34 minutes, the computer announced. All weapons systems fully operational. Target acquisition beginning. On the main display screen, Sarah could see Guardian's sensors beginning to scan the surrounding area. Red dots appeared on a map of the base and surrounding terrain, each representing a potential target. Military vehicles, aircraft, and even individual soldiers were being marked for destruction. Dr. Chen, Morrison said desperately, is there anything you can do to stop this? Any override or kill switch you built into the system? Sarah stared at the screens, watching her creation prepare to become a killing machine. She had built Guardian to protect people, not to slaughter them. But as she looked at the code modifications Marcus had implemented, she realized there was one option left. There is one thing, she said slowly, but it will require me to activate Guardian's final protocol. It's designed as a last resort if Guardian is ever compromised or turned against its creators. What does it do? Walsh asked. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. It causes Guardian to target its own control systems and destroy itself, along with any connected weapons platforms. But to activate it, I have to use my emergency codes in a specific way that will make Guardian think I'm ordering an immediate attack. Guardian activation in 28 minutes, the computer announced, beginning target prioritization sequence. Morrison looked at Sarah with understanding and dread. You're saying that to stop Guardian, you have to essentially activate it first? That's exactly what I'm saying, Sarah confirmed. I have to input my access codes in a way that tells Guardian to fire on everything within its sensor range, including itself. It's the only way to trigger the self-destruct protocol. Walsh checked his watch. Dr. Chen, if we're going to do this, we need to do it now. In less than half an hour, Guardian will be fully active and potentially unstoppable. Sarah placed her hands on the control terminal keyboard and took a deep breath. She was about to use her life's work to destroy itself, but she knew it was the only way to prevent a catastrophe that could claim thousands of lives. Emergency Activation Protocol, Dr. Sarah Chen, she said to the computer while entering her access codes. Immediate target engagement authorized. Fire on all designated targets. Emergency activation confirmed, the computer responded. Guardian weapon systems activating immediately. All targets designated for immediate engagement. For a moment that stretched into eternity. Nothing happened. Then, the base was suddenly filled with the sound of missiles launching and automated weapons firing in all directions. Sarah had given Guardian the command to attack everything in its sensor range, including its own control systems and weapons platforms. Self-destruct sequence initiated, the computer announced as explosions began to rock the building. Guardian systems terminating in 60 seconds. As alarms blared and the building shook with explosions, Sarah watched her creation destroy itself rather than become a weapon of mass murder. Her access code had indeed fired the arsenal, but in a way that saved countless lives rather than taking them. In the end, the general had driven her off the base, but her return in those final moments had prevented Guardian from becoming the nightmare its creators had intended. The woman who had built the ultimate defensive weapon had found the courage to use her own codes to ensure it could never be turned against the innocent.